Konami games, a necessity for gracious living.
Throughout the 80s and 90s and into the noughties, this Japanese video game developer and publisher would build up a stellar reputation for producing some of the finest game around for arcades, home consoles and even home computers. Konami was the king of delivering classic series after classic series, from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games to the Metal Gear series to Silent Hill, Castlevania, Gambari Goemon and so much more. This company could not put a foot wrong. Nearly every piece of hardware that was available to play back in the day had its own set of Konami classics. This company was simply amazing. While most people are familiar with these insanely iconic games that would prop various systems up throughout the console wars, what fewer people will be aware of is the fact that, at one point in time, Konami intended to enter the hardware arena with a traditional competitive game console to call their own. So without further ado,
I am Lady Decade and this is the story of the lost Konami console.
While most of us are familiar with Konami's work today through the quality gaming experiences that they have delivered to us in the past, Konami as a company has a history that stretches way further back than video games. Konami started life back in the summer of '69. Times are changing and the chairman of the company, Kagemasa Kazuki, is looking at everything that had come and gone. Previously, this gentleman in question had run a successful jukebox rental and repair business in Osaka. However, despite these being the best days of his life, he knew that it was now or never and transformed his business into a manufacturer of amusement machines for arcades. Their first coin-operated games would finally see release in 1978 and came in the form of Block Game, Block Invader, Spaceship and Space King. Quickly making a splash within the industry, by just the following year, Konami was already shipping products as far as the United States of America. Real success and global acclaim for Konami would occur for the company in 1981 though, with the release of the all-time classic known as Frogger.
Come on, bitches love Frogger.
This simple game where you play as a frog crossing a road and river was so successful that it was cloned by every developer under the sun or simply reproduced in several bootleg forms. You could not get away from these frog-based games for a while, and all of this was thanks to the magic of Konami. The company would consistently manage to strike gold and had other big hits around this time too, such as Scramble and Super Cobra for example. Konami wasn't just in the gaming business, they were in the empire business. The money Konami made from all of this allowed them to set up a subsidiary on US soil, which allowed them to spread their wings and start developing games for the highly popular Atari VCS platform, overall spreading their influence across the world of gaming even further. Moving into the following year, 1983, the infamous year that pesky regional North American Atari crash happened, whereby the US general public decided that they were sick of playing games on dated hardware and collectively made the decision that they did not want to give complacent Atari any more of their hard-earned money.
So what's for Konami now?
Well, the savvy company were astute to this and shifted their focus towards developing their games for microcomputers, which eventually ended up taking over Europe for a while. Most notable of all when it comes to Konami and microcomputers were the games that they had released on the MSX range of computers. Konami was perhaps the greatest publisher for all of these platforms, releasing over 70 different games in total. These included big hits such as Vampire Killer and Gambari Goemon. Even the iconic Metal Gear started life in this computing format, which is rather impressive. Moving forward into 1985, Nintendo entertainment fever began to sweep America, and as a result, Konami, who constantly had their finger on the pulse of gaming, began developing several games for that platform too. The following years led to Konami's biggest growth period to date, debuting games such as Gradius, Castlevania, Twin B, Contra, and more. The success of the company's NES titles led to Konami earning from $10 million in 1987 up to a hefty $300 million by 1991.
This lot clearly knew what they were doing.
That same year, Konami moved its headquarters to Tokyo, and by the end of 1992 was outputting games for the Super Nintendo, PC Engine and Sega Mega Drive. Konami was now one of the largest third-party developers on the entirety of planet Earth. As we are all aware, Konami's momentum for a good while just kept rolling forward, especially into Sony PlayStation era. Games such as Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid and Keiichiro Toyama's Silent Hill became two of the most memorable games on the platform. So, with all this outrageous success and Konami developing games across the home console, microcomputer and arcade market, it certainly feels logical that Konami would consider a console of their very own down the line, at the very least.
So who could have possibly known more about running a successful game business at the time than Konami?
Gamasutra.com sheds light on this possibility with interviews with several former Konami employees, such as Yoshitaka Murayama, who worked on a number of the Suikoden games. Murayama states that he joined Konami as a new graduate in 1992 in the role of a programmer, and suggests that he participated in the development of a Konami game console. He states, "In my second year after joining the department I was in, I was put in charge of creating games for Konami's game machine, and that's when I got involved in game design. Since it was an extremely secret project inside of Konami, there were very few people involved. So even though I was close to being a new recruit, I was expected to play a very large role." The plan at first was for Konami's game machine to be a console type, and it was suggested that it would have a card reader function to allow players to exchange data. The plan changed midway from a console type to a portable type game machine, and it was going to have 3D polygon functionality that was not common at the time. So this means that there is not just one cancelled Konami system, but two. One in the form of a home console, another in the form of a handheld. Said handheld, which, as we just mentioned, development switched later to. Murayama goes on to mention that the platform would have been cartridge based and was indeed to be somewhat like the Game Boy, but with a much higher class feel. Bougie. If this system had come to fruition, it sounds like it could have been potentially groundbreaking. After all, this was 1992 and we didn't receive a proper handheld with lots of polygons until the Nintendo DS and Sony PSP 12 years later in 2004. Murayama also mentions that all designs of this platform are sadly apparently lost, which is why he drew the comparison to the Game Boy in the interview. Further to this, he states that he was working on both an RPG and a fighting game for the cancelled platform, whilst another team were working on a racing game and 2 further RPGs. These titles were all completely abandoned. However, Murayama paid a small homage to the lost RPG by reusing one of the characters' names, which was Ted, within his Suikoden game.
Nice!
Regarding the total abolishment of the Konami System project, Murayama states that it all came to a grinding halt, with the news of the Sony PlayStation being on the horizon. So the whole company reshifted its focus onto developing titles for that platform instead. Another gentleman who mentions this Konami console was Masaki Kukino, who worked on arcade games such as Asterix, Silent Scope and Haunted Castle, also known as the Castlevania arcade game, just to name a few. He mentions that Konami was looking to release a system around 1994. This is of no surprise, considering that was around the period that every bugger under the sun released a platform after the success that they had seen with Nintendo and Sega. To quote Kukino with regards to this platform's termination, he states that, "I was not an insider with regards to the home division, but here is what I think. Probably technology-wise, developing hardware for a home console was no problem for Konami, but when it comes to costs, in terms of developing a console that is, technologically speaking, really capable and high capacity, and then having it make money while maintaining that high capacity was maybe a challenge for Konami. The other possible challenge is distribution, so probably the company had to make a comprehensive analysis of business feasibility and opted out. So Konami's rise towards developing a game console, and ultimately probably why they decided to stay third party. Well, a mostly third party at least, as there was a Konami console that did see a release, but that's a story for another time. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe and check out my video on the lost Sega Genesis console add-on. See you soon.